So we're going to be going halfway across the world to Kenya. There have been protests. I know a lot of people have been focusing on the protests in France. There have been protests in Netherlands. There have been protests in Germany. But there have also been protests in African countries. And these protests are the people rising up and saying that enough is enough. So a lot has been happening in Kenya, particularly in the capital, Nairobi. So we're going to get into this. And one of the things I'm going to share with you guys right now is an article. And this is from the AP. It says anti-government protests in Kenya hit Nairobi for second week. So this was late last week. As you can see here, these are the Kenyan protests that are happening right now. It says thousands of anti-government protesters marched on the streets of Kenya's capital, Nairobi, on Monday, despite the government's declaration that the protests are illegal. Remind you of someplace? Opposition leader Raila Odinga joined protesters on the western side of the capital, where his convoy attracted thousands of protesters, and he addressed them at various stops, calling for electoral justice and reduced prices for food items. Police used water cannons and tear gas to disperse supporters. Police Chief Japeth Kume insists that the protests are illegal, but Odinga says Kenyans have a right to demonstrate. Odinga and his party, Azimio la Umoja, One Kenya Coalition, are leading the protest against the rising cost of living and calling for President William Ruto's resignation, saying he wasn't validly elected in last year's election. I have to be very careful with this, though. This subject, especially that last part. Protests occurred last week, and Odinga has urged his followers to take to the streets twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. More than a dozen civil society groups have a joint statement expressed concern over police declaring Monday's protests illegal and urged authorities to uphold constitutional right and peaceful demonstrations. Ruto over the weekend urged Odinga to face him directly and stop terrorizing the country, in quotes. So starting off, this sounds a lot like something that happened in this country. But really, this is like what they said was they found the shift in administrations illegitimate in Kenya, and as well as the rising cost of living. People are just sick and tired of being sick and tired. So that's what's going on in Kenya. But it's not exactly like here in the United States. But at the same time, people are tired. And they want to have a shift in government. Let's continue on. Odinga's plan in last week's protest was to march to the president's offices at the State House, but police erected barriers to prevent public access, and motorists were directed to alternative routes. Ruto is currently out of the country visiting Germany. Of course. Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua shared photos of himself at his office early Monday morning and urged Kenyans to report to work. So it's like, don't protest. Just go to work. Go to work and push this economy forward, even though it's not working for you. Nairobi's central business district remained calm, but most businesses were closed on Monday due to this uncertainty over demonstrations and if there would be violence. There were reports of some violence, that they call violence, directed at Odinga and his supporters. Some people raided a farm in the outskirts of the capital owned by a family of the former president, Uhuru Kenyatta, cutting trees and taking away sheep, according to the local media reports. The former president supported Odinga in 2022 elections. So this is what's been going on. There is some video that has been going on as well. And I'm going to be showing that in just 1 second. Oh, found it. Let me enlarge this just so you guys have that. So I'm ready to go. So if you guys don't follow the International Magazine on Twitter, I urge you to do so. This also gives some what's going on in around the world, especially when it comes to rebellions like this. This is also very important to take into account as we observe what's going on around the world. So this is what's been going on in Kenya. They are really just doing what many people around the world have been doing within the last couple of months, really. Mass protests been going on, and because they're sick and tired of being sick and tired. And this is really due to capitalism. I mean, the West has been pushing, not just austerity within their own governments, but also governments like Kenya. Kenya is actually a former colony of Britain. And so they are sick and tired of really their administrations being lackeys of the West and making it so that their people are subject to austerity, and there is wealth disparities in different countries in Africa, including Kenya. And so people are tired. And so they're rising up. They're realizing what we all know is that the numbers are with them. The numbers are with the people. And this is why you have support from the Communist Party in Kenya as we speak. Now, they took a very measured response to this, but I also want to give attention to that as well. And let me get that up for you guys, because what they say is actually very interesting regarding what the movement that the opposition leader is pushing forward. Why'd you do that? All right. Sorry. I'm talking to my computer. My computer is a little wonky. Or either I'm user error. I'm the wonky one. Oh well. So this is from the Communist Party of Cuba. It says, through the Communist Party of Kenya supports, though the Communist Party of Kenya supports the protest against the raging inflation, they also issued a warning against supporting opportunist leaders like Odinga. So this is what is going on. So they support the protests, but they warn, it's like, Odinga is a opportunist, so be careful. And so with that, you'll have some people who will be protesting military operations. They will protest things that the government is doing, which really displaces working people. And you may have some figures that may be opportunists that really aren't for the people. Or you may encounter political figures that do not have our interests at heart. But at the same time, you see people who are out in the streets who are protesting what the government is doing, and rightfully so. Case in point, let's say hypothetically you have someone like Donald Trump that talks about, needing to end the war in Ukraine. And there is agreement there. The proxy war in Ukraine needs to end because it really serves us no good. But just like, even though he's correct on that issue, be careful. Because he may even say, get out in the streets and say, oppose this proxy war. Yes, get out in the streets and oppose the proxy war. But make no mistake, someone like Donald Trump is an opportunist. And he is a racist and he's a fascist enabler. And so therefore, you only take what he says with a grain of salt, but you don't follow him, right? Because he's basically just like Biden, except for he's just playing the part of being on the opposite side so that he can garner more support. So this is what I take from this and from what the caution that's being pushed by the Communist Party in Kenya is saying. And so I think that's also very important. Because support people, be wary of leadership. See what I mean? And I think that's important for us to keep in mind. So there's also some words from members in the Communist Party of Cuba that have been in the media and Kenyan media, and I would like to give some attention to that. And this is some thoughts that were given by Booker Ngesa Omole. And he is part of the Communist Party in Kenya. He's the National Vice Chairperson and National Organizing Secretary of the Communist Party in Kenya. So we're going to give him a listen and see what he has to say regarding the protests in the streets, particularly in Nairobi. First, he says, people don't wish to go to the streets to protest, but the government has forced them to dramatize a failure in policy. Anything the masses will get from this government will be a product of the struggle. So let's get into it.
There is a logic in protesting. What Arnold is falling for is the Kenya Kwanza logic. They want to make us look like, people go to the street because they are willing. That you wake up tomorrow and you are having a holiday, so you are going to go to the streets. So you are enjoying yourself in the streets, battling them. The police. For me, I think that needs to be replaced by a new logic. And the new logic is the pro-people logic, that the people rise to go to the streets because a small minority has imposed their will upon them, and they cannot continue suffering anymore. So the question you're asking, my colleague here, that will that make things any better?
Yeah, what is the
yeah, but we're already dying in our houses. What is it? What is the logic of staying home, hoping that things will be better, while in actual sense, life is getting much harder for the majority of the people, while the minority continue to, to burn money and live in luxury.
President.
So when we organize ourselves to go to the street, we go to the street to dramatize a failure in government policy.
Right.
And we ask the Kenyan people to join us to go to the street. That street, when we go to the street, you're telling us, do not disrupt people. Of course, the street action is meant to disrupt. In fact, the actual thing is that at that very moment when we are going to the street, we expect that if the government want to prevent us from going to the street, then the government must start to roll out a policy to give us dignity. Failure to which, then they have to meet us in the streets.
Meet us in the streets. Woo! Yeah. Wow. Interesting. So yeah, that's what he basically said. Ryan Wagner, yeah, this is a great point. He says, it's a simple question. Would you rather live on your knees in chains or die on your feet fighting for your freedom? And yeah, that's basically what is going on here. So that is a very good point that was brought on. He said, we're literally dying at home. So why are we going to sit at home and die at home, whereas we can fight for ourselves in the streets? Fight for our lives in the streets instead of dying at home. So I think that's something that really we need to bring these points here at home in the United States. And the fight just doesn't have to be going to blows in the streets. The fight can also be making power dynamics within our material needs. So like a lot of us always talk about, and we brought this up yesterday during our anniversary stream, was regarding things like mutual aid, right? Building dual power, building mutual aid. One of the things that I would like to do, especially here in my state of Florida, is starting to help people get resources for housing, especially people who may be, in fear of eviction. Because one of the things that that trips me out is that if you are on the verge of being evicted, let's say you just don't have enough money to cover your rent, and so you don't want to even start the eviction process because that's an expensive process that's brought on to you as a renter. But these foundations will not help you until the eviction process starts. And so then what is the person to do? They basically have to allow themselves to get to the point to be on the verge of getting kicked out of their home in order to receive help. It's like when you're cooking on a grill, and if many of you have cooked on a grill, and your hand is not on the fire, your hand's not naturally on the hot grill, but it's right there, you can still get burned because it's that hot. I have been at grills where literally less than 6 inches away, your hand away from the heat, you start to get burned, right? You start to cook your hand. And the thing is like, they really want you to get to that point where you're basically 2 inches from that heat in order to ask for help. When in reality, we're not trying to get even that close. And I don't think it's feasible, I don't think it's right that anybody should get that close. And so this is why I want to set up, mutual aid programs that help people, even further down the line. Let's say they have like 2 weeks to pay their rent and they don't have that. They don't have it. It's like, okay, yeah, we're not even going to allow you to get to the eviction process, because then you have to pay the court fees, the attorney fees, you have to pay the late fees and all that other stuff. It's like, no, we don't even want you to get there. And so there are things like that. There are people who are trying to help feed people who are homeless or people who are food insecure, that type of mutual aid. There are people, maybe you're in healthcare, maybe you're a tech, maybe you're a nurse. Maybe you can use your skills to help people for free who may have simple issues. Maybe you're a nurse practitioner. And so getting these mutual aid organizations off the ground so that we can be able to help people, so that they will have less dependence upon these systems, so that we can build a groundswell of support. And so this is one of the reasons why I think it is absolutely necessary to fight on this front as well. And so, what this gentleman Booker is saying, I fully am on board with. There's also some other things that he said as well that I also want to give some attention to. Let me go to my list. If anybody remembers, in oh, that's a good point. If anybody remembers, sorry, I'm losing my track. If anybody remembers, it is important to belong into organizations, right? And that is what's really important. And so, actually, let me see this. I know this is kind of unethical of me, but I want to see this. Well, just got contact from him. Great. I'll be trying to get an interview with Booker Ngesa Omode. So once that happens, then I will let you guys know. Just got a DM from him, so that was great. So but yeah, so I wanted to share what's going on in the streets right now, and then I also have another point that I want to show you. Yes, here we go. So this is going to be talking about the protesters that are clashing with police in Nairobi. So let's get into this.
Place. So there's still a lot of things that may happen in the next few hours. Maybe Raila Odinga will show up. Maybe Martha Karua, the deputy, will show up. Maybe there'll be more activity with the police and the protesters. We're just waiting to see what happens in the next few hours.
Okay, thank you for that.
So, yeah. And if you guys look at the streets that's going on right now, does it remind you of the United States, and especially during the George Floyd protests? People are fed up. People are fed up with the amount of inequality that has been going on, the rising cost of living, whether it's food, healthcare, housing, people are just done. And can you blame them? And this is the rise of, the working class in places like Kenya that we also need to express our solidarity with. Because the workers' movement is not just in the United States. It goes way beyond our borders. It's across the world. It is international. Solidarity with the workers around the world. This is why the phrase "workers of the world unite," that's why it's so important, because we have to stop this inequality, this issue that the West has been trying to dominate the world, on behalf of the corporate dictators. So this is why it's so important. Let me see. I have this article as well. And I was looking up because I was just like, the US is trying to project more influence on Kenya. Why? Why is the US trying to project more influence on Kenya? Let me show you this. If you just look up on Google, what are Kenya's natural resources? It says the natural resources that are found in Kenya include limestone, soda ash, salt, gemstones, fluorite, zinc, diatomite, oil, gas, gold, gypsum, wildlife, and hydropower. So there are natural resources that are central to Kenya that they also want as well. And the interesting fact is that there was a statement that was made by Booker Ingesa Omole regarding one of our senators. And you guys take a look at this. This is actually going to be very interesting. So when I heard him say this name, I was like, why is it talking about our senator in this country? Let's go.
And the other thing of Chris Coons, by the way, Chris Coons is not a friend of the Kenyan people. He is actually one of the enemies of the Kenyan people. He supports, the imperialist policies in this government. And Chris Coons, for a fact, brings out what I call the particularity of the head of opposition and the people in government, William Samoei Ruto. They are not being controlled locally. In fact, Ruto, and through his deputy president, is complaining about his policies or unnecessary pressure from their foreign partners to negotiate with Raila Amolo Odinga. This Ruto administration have so many policies that have been imposed upon them by foreign interests and foreign powers. We were discussing about the issue of the school system, the curriculum system. We saw the hands who was financing it. We cannot say that Chris Coons will be unsuccessful. In fact, as long as President Ruto remains, Eurocentric or Western-centric in terms of determining its goal, then I can assure you that Chris Coons is going to have his way, is going to put the interest of Raila Amolo Odinga and the interest of William Samoei Ruto, not the interest of the Kenyan people. What we are saying is that the direct interference of the domestic policy by foreign powers is something that we cannot tolerate from the Communist Party of Kenya. We just want the Kenyan people to take charge of their destiny and be able to come up with, issues that affects the majority of the people.
Lighter note, I'm not sure you're just supporting your Chinese, counterparts. You've really attacked the West. So
No. Surely. No.
On
In fact, when you talk about the Chinese, the question was not about the Chinese.
Okay.
The question was about the economic model that continues to spur growth in the world. That is the economic model of the China government.
Right.
But we are not talking about, because if you talk about the Chinese, then you are falling for the anti-Chinese racist and cynical propaganda that is being propped by the American common interest in our country today.
Thank you.
In fact, the black people, the African people have a lot of historical...
Chris Coons, he says. Senator Chris Coons of Delaware? Interesting. Chris Coons was recently in Kenya. Why would he be in Kenya? Why are you in Kenya, Chris? Because wasn't Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, in Africa trying to charm Africans into uniting more with the United States? Let's get into that. Let's take a look-see. Got an article to share. So this says Raila Odinga meets U.S. Senator Chris Coons in Nairobi. This was 3 days ago. There they are. Right? It says Azimio la Umoja One Kenya leader Raila Odinga on Wednesday, March 29th, met United States Senator Christopher Coons, who is in Nairobi, Kenya, to hold talks with national leaders. Talking to his Twitter page on Wednesday, Odinga said the talks between him and Coons, who is a senator from Delaware, were successful. We had a fruitful discussion on the importance of upholding the Constitution and the rule of law, and he agreed to keep the channels of communication open. Isn't this the opposition leader that's encouraging people to be out in the streets? This is interesting. This is really interesting. Let's continue. So here's Chris Coons with Odinga. Says Coons is known for having keen interest in Kenya's political affairs. In August 2022, he visited the country and asked the top leadership to preside over peaceful elections and a smooth handover of power. Before meeting Odinga on Wednesday, the American lawmaker held talks with Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, sorry, I'm having trouble with that name, in Nairobi. This morning, this was a couple days ago on March 29th, I hosted a delegation from the U.S. led by Senator for Delaware, Christopher Andrew Coons, for consultations towards strengthening ties between the two nations, especially in trade, security, democracy, among other key issues of mutual interest. Says, on behalf of President William Ruto, I thank President Biden and the people of the United States of America through the Senator of being critical partners in development of dealing with a host of challenges, including famine and drought. The Senator's visit to Kenya comes at a time when Odinga is leading protests against President Ruto's administration, accusing it of doing nothing to improve the living standards of Kenyans. Odinga also accuses Ruto of engineering electoral malpractice in the August election that locked him out of the State House. So it seems like Chris Coons is playing both sides. The opposition side, as well as the government side in Kenya. While I do support the people going out into the streets and making demands of their government and trying to have a more equal and equitable government, something smells fishy here. I don't know about you, but whenever the United States gets involved in something, something stinks. Something stinks to high heaven. And I don't trust it. And this is why the Communist Party in Kenya said, get out in the streets, yes, but be wary of the people leading the protests. See what I mean? And this is why we need to be very careful about people who are calling for us to get out in the streets. Yes, that's important. But who's doing the calling? Right? And what are their goals? What are their motives? See what I mean? Because every single movement has had somebody co-opt it in some way. Hell, we talk about defunding the police, and they'll talk about, oh, well, yeah, we did this locally. We actually took some of the money from police and put it in here. And it was only just for a temporary thing. And the police are still doing the same things that they've always been doing. Black Lives Matter protests. What did the government do? They put on kente cloth and they took a knee, a rickety knee, on the marble floors of the Capitol in order to show solidarity with Black people. Even though we're still getting murdered in the streets, our healthcare disparities are still triple that of white people. We still haven't gotten reparations for what's going on, for the last 400 years. We still have disparities as far as housing. What about what's going on in the border, right? The border, you still have kids that are still in cages. Some of those same people decided, well, I'm going to go down to the border and I'm going to give the President Trump a piece of my mind. This is unacceptable. And then guess what? They went down to the border. They cried. They cried at the border. Then Biden comes in. Kids are still at the border. Have they traveled back down to the border to protest? Did they give Biden a piece of their mind? No, they did not. Why? It was a political issue for them. It wasn't a policy issue and it wasn't a human issue. The same people that told you to get out into the streets to protest Trump should have been the same people to tell you to get out in the streets and continue to protest against Joe Biden. But as soon as Biden got into power, guess what? Shh. That's not necessary. We got him. We don't need that. Just sit down. Sit down. Sit down. There are people out there who will tell you We need to protest this government. We need to fight. And they'll say, I'm a fighter. Just get me into Congress. Just get me into the House. Just get me into the presidency. And I promise I'll fight for you. Talk is cheap. Also, ask the question, what have they been doing on the ground to help people before they even got to office? They have to show us that they are that person before they even get there. But they haven't. They don't. Be mindful of who is trying to lead the movements, especially people who are working to make themselves, to put themselves in the front, to put themselves in the limelight, to make it seem like they are the leaders. If the person wants to be the leader, chances are they're not the right one. They're not somebody that should be leading. Typically, the right one is the person that doesn't want to be. Typically, that's really who it should be. The person that actually doesn't want the job. That's fighting for the right cause, for the right reasons. That actually does things on the ground. That's actually typically the person who should be leading movements and using their leadership to uplift the people so that they can lead themselves. And they just want to be an advisor, just a voice of reason. Because ultimately, we save us. We don't need a leader in that way. So yeah,